Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to the Halliburton Auditorium, those of you who are joining us here and also joining us online. At this time, we'd ask that you double check your cell phones, make sure they are turned off or in the vibrate position. And now I'd like to introduce Amanda Kite, the president of WISE. Amanda?
All right, there we go. So those of you online, I was actually welcoming you here as well, and appreciate the time that you've given us today to join us for this special guest speaker. Starting off with a safety moment relevant to the Houston and I would say really the Gulf area right now, we're having some pretty nasty weather, and I just want to make sure those who are here in the facility understand that power goes down or something hits us in the next hour, just make your way down the stairs. Shelter areas are just outside here into the restrooms. But those of you who are joining online, if you're also experiencing bad weather in your area, make sure that you take precaution and necessary measures to exit the building. So I want to talk just very quickly about WISE and kind of do a shout out for those of you who are involved in the organization. WISE has been in place for about 4 years now inside of Halliburton, and I've had the privilege of being involved in WISE in a couple of different capacities. But it's pretty cool to see events like this come to life with different partnerships with individuals like Petro and other organizations to bring speakers to us to talk about, I would say, various topics that are uh, relevant to either Halliburton culture and our leadership and professional development, getting involved in the community, helping with various work life priorities and tools and resources to help us out with that. So I appreciate the investment that all of you in Halliburton give to us in the WISE organization and the time to come to these events. But I'd like to hand it over. I'm not going to steal the thunder. I'm going to hand it over to Laura Schilling to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon.
Thank you, Amanda. So good afternoon, Halliburton, and to some of our guests and friends who are online. My name is Laura Schilling. I'm currently Global Business Development Manager for our Well Intervention business, but I'm also a proud leader within Halliburton, having been here about 14 years. To see something like this come together is truly exciting. I want to thank our partners at Shell and Petro. This year, I joined the Executive Advisory Board for Petro, and I'll introduce Katie in just a moment. But thanks to her and our network of women here in the Houston area around oil and gas, is how we got introduced to Yasmin, and we have the pleasure of having her here all the way from Australia. And she's going to bring a fantastic message to you guys today. Just to let you know who we have about 100 people in the room here at Halliburton today, and we have about 600 plus who are dialed in online from all over the world to join us for this event. And so, good morning and good evening to them. Just a few of the countries I want to give a shout out to the folks who have stayed up late so they could dial in. We've got folks from Saudi and Oman, Malaysia, Australia, back from her home country, Argentina, Colombia, Tanzania, Cameroon, Algeria, and our folks in the UK and Scotland are also staying up to listen to us today. So thank you so much for your interest. I think you'll really enjoy the message that she brings. You know, Pink Petro, WISE, our partners at Shell, and I should mention that Mehnert is here. Halliburton actually brought the funding to help Pink Petro get off the ground, and we're one of the founding partners in Pink Petro, and it illustrates our commitment as a company to global collaboration for women in oil and gas and women across Halliburton. And it's such an exciting platform to see where it's coming to, and we're excited to have this event with her to bring it all together. You know, it's been a tough couple of years I think for everyone in the industry, and platforms like this are so important in order to bring us all together to collaborate and learn together. And as we come into the upcycle and come onto the other side of the downturn that we've been experiencing, it's going to be ideas like people from Yasmin, Katie, from those of us to really lead the industry forward. And this is a great platform to start to talk about how to do it better and how to do it differently. So with that, I'm pleased to announce Katie Mehnert and invite her to come up and introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks. I'm going to stand and not get behind the podium, but I'm going to use my device. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Katie Mehnert, and I'm the founder and CEO of Pink Petro. Pink Petro is an online community, a digital platform to bring women and men across the industry together in a safe place where we can learn, network, and grow in our careers. And growth is really difficult right now, right? We've had a really tough few years. We've had a really tough few months. But we know that energy is needed. And so what we do is we help individuals and companies experience energy. And today we're going to experience energy through a wonderful story that Yasmin is going to tell us about today. I want to let you know we are in 31 countries across the world, and I want to thank Halliburton, Shell, and KPMG, and really all of the companies and the individuals that are online and that may be in the room today for your support of us. We are growing massively, and it's really exciting to see the power of social technology and the ability for our industry to own our story. So, Yasmin, let me just tell you about Yasmin. Wow. Our trip on the way up here to Halliburton Headquarters is amazing. Because the first thing that she told me she did to de-stress was watch lots of Netflix. So she's an amazing, amazing woman. At the age of 2, her and her family moved to Australia. She's been breaking barriers since 2. At the age of 16, when most of us are in the US at least learning how to drive or getting our driver's license, she founded an organization called Youth Without Borders, and it's about bringing youth together to make their communities better. And I was informed the other day that at the ripe old age of 25, because Yasmin has turned 25, that she must now turn her organization over because she's reached the age limit. So Yasmin is a petrol head, driller. She wrote a book while being offshore. She is a Formula One race car person. She's got so many lovely talents. But one of the things that she's going to talk to you today is about barriers and bias, and how in the corporate world, but in the personal world, how we can see those and bust through silos and bust through and think through differently. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Yasmin to the stage to talk and welcome you to our large audience online. I believe we have now 1,000 or so that are watching. So that is amazing. Let's give her a warm round of applause. Thank you so much. You're amazing. How you all going? Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone online for tuning in. So, a woman like this walks past you in the street. Do you imagine she's a mother, clearly, or a refugee, or a victim of oppression? Or do you think she's a lawyer, a cardiologist, or maybe even your local politician? Do you look her up and down, wondering how hot she must get, or if her husband had forced her to wear that outfit? I am that woman. And the way that I wear my scarf, and the way that I wrap a particular piece of cloth around my head, changes the way that people interact on a daily basis. And yes, that same woman
is also a driller. But this conversation isn't necessarily about Muslim women and their hijab, because Lord knows we have enough conversations about women and what they wear and how much value we attach to how they present themselves to the world. This is a conversation about looking beyond the bias. So, I'm going to play a game with you guys. It's called Two Truths and a Lie. And I'm going to tell you 3 facts about myself. 2 of them are true, 1 of them is false, and you have to guess which is the false one. I'll get you guys to put your hands up at the end. So fact number 1 is that I was a boxer for 5 years and I competed competitively. Fact number 2 is that I designed and built my own race car. And fact number 3 is that I was a champion swimmer in high school. Who thinks fact number 1 is false about being a boxer? A couple of brave souls. Who thinks fact number 2 is false about designing and building my own race car? Who thinks fact number 3 is false about being... You guys clearly know the stereotype is true, that because I was born in Sudan, like, no bodies of water. Yeah. If you put your hand up for fact number 3, give yourselves a pat on the back. Well done. I'm a terrible swimmer. I considered doing an Ironman and then realized there would be water involved and decided no. The reality is that I like to do a lot of things that perhaps people don't expect. And there's something really fun about walking into a room and knowing that people just don't expect you to be a boxer or a race car engineer or any of those sorts of things. And I take like enormous pleasure in that. My parents weren't hugely enamored by the fact that I wanted to. They were like, why couldn't you do ballet or maybe debating, a normal sport, right? But I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different. And this was me in primary school. So really quickly, tell you a little bit about myself before I get into it. As you heard, I was born in Sudan and we moved to Brisbane in Queensland in Australia at the age of 2. And my family, we were the second Sudanese family in Brisbane, right? It was a big country town at the time, white as hell. And so we were just a novelty, right? We were like, people would be like staring at us as we walk past the streets. What? Who are these creatures? Where are they from? And I was like a fat African baby that just ran around with this big afro and ate other people's food. I was like, ooh, delicious. This isn't like what mom makes. And I guess I didn't really ever think of myself as different, partly because I didn't see anyone else that looked like me, but nobody ever really reminded me that I was. And so I walked into a lot of situations not expecting to be treated any different. And just as an FYI, this is my baby, the race car that at university I designed and built, and it's a beast. And these are the boys, the race team. But for weird reasons, they all called me mum, right? Like, partly because I think the only woman in authority they had in their lives up until that moment was their mother, which is slightly sad and a reflection on society. But it was bizarre because for an entire year, I had a bunch of 19, 20-year-old blokes calling me mum. And at the shopping centre, it made for a very strange picture. Like, these are not my children. Oh, I should also say, the photo at the beginning, that is not my baby. A random baby. And so now, where I ended up, and I will come back to this, but somehow, somewhere, I decided that I wanted to join the oil field. And it kind of happened because I wanted to be a race car engineer and driver. When I was 13, I watched a movie called Catch That Kid. We had this tradition at home where every Friday we would go to the video store, we would hire a movie, like everyone would pick a movie. My little brother would always pick the weirdest movie. We picked one called Catch That Kid. I don't recommend the movie. It's terrible. It's like the Italian Job for kids, right? They rob the bank and they escape in go-kart. But there was this scene where one of the guys is like cruising around in this go-kart, like banging around this race car track, and I'm like, that is what I want to do with my life. I want to be the first female black Muslim Formula One driver. Mission, okay, challenge accepted. And my mom was like, sure, you go do that. And although they didn't really back my dream to be a Formula One driver, I just started getting really into cars and really into the world of driving. And ended up doing mechanical engineering at university, running the race team, and going to England to get into this motorsport master's. Offered work experience at Mercedes, and then realized that I would need a bit of money, but also wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to dedicate this sacrifice that my parents had made moving to Australia simply to the racetrack. So I came back to Australia and I thought, what could I do that would be a little bit of an adventure? Why not join the Oilers? And I got a job as an MWD with Tommy Day. And actually the first time, it's funny being back in Houston, because the first time I came to Houston, I spent 6 weeks in Sugarland and Katy, like that area, but I didn't have a car. So that was my entire world. I thought Houston was just Katy, right? Katy and Katy Mall. It was beautiful. But why am I here? And why, I guess, am I talking, and what is it that I'm talking to you guys about? There's the concept of bias and unconscious bias and implicit bias has been something that people have been talking about a lot recently. And it's really fascinating. And I did a talk on this recently. And the TED talk that I did, I was actually working offshore when I was writing the script, right? And I thought, I'm going to test this on the blokes. So I got a couple of the guys, a couple of the roughnecks. I was like, guys, I need to tell you something. Sat them down and made them listen to my talk. They're sitting there, and by the end of it, one of them was like, Yasmin, sounds great, but why should I care? And it was the first time in my life where somebody straight up to my face was like, I literally just don't care. Like, this sounds great, but I just don't care. And I was like, what do you mean? Why should you care? So we can make the world a better place, like, surely. And he was like, nah, why should I care? Like, it was like, I'm worried about my wife taking my house, like, like, I've got other problems. Like, why should I care about the issues that some, ethnic kid from downtown faces? Like, it's got nothing to do with me. And so for the first time, it made me reassess kind of how I talk about the issue and why it's relevant to more than just me. Because it affects me in the world that I live in, but how does it affect everyone else? And so I guess it made me think about the two things, the moral imperative and the business imperative. And the business imperative, I think, around bias is pretty straightforward. Well, for me, it's always been pretty straightforward. There's the stats around diversity, the stats that if you're a more diverse company, you will have X number of more sales because your users are more diverse. Or if you've got more women in your leadership, you'll have like an additional X number of dollars to your bottom line. But I think the example that is really relevant to this industry is all about protecting the downside. And that's where that last line comes from. So BP, as we know, lost billions in Macondo. And as a drilling engineer, we learn all about what happened in Macondo, what mistakes were made, what decisions weren't necessarily completely unflawed. And there's this really interesting moment. One of the decisions that were made was around the inflow test, right? There was a test that was done, and the test results were interpreted a specific way. Now, the bias that came into play was essentially something called cognitive confirmation bias, right? So there was this piece around, we believe that the well is safe, so we will find information that reinforces the belief we already have. And we will find information, and we will essentially look at the information a certain way because we already have kind of decided what the outcome is going to be. And also, in the same incident, you have something called groupthink, which is, for example, there was a decision made about particular centralizers, and when a couple of engineers queried that, the general consensus was, you know what, let's not make a big fuss about it, let's just kind of go with what people want. And because as a group, we usually tend to try to sort of go with what the group is saying. And we talk about this in safety all the time. We don't necessarily want to put our hands up and be the person that's going to cause a fuss, but that reinforces this concept of groupthink. And it says that our bias is towards being part of the group. It is towards accepting what the group has already decided. So these aren't necessarily gender and racial biases, but these are cognitive biases, ways our brains work that change the way, or that sometimes flaw our decision making in business. And it's really, really important to be aware of it so that we do protect the downside, so that we do ensure that we keep people safe and that we continue doing things in the way, we continue getting the outcomes that we want. The moral imperative for me if we want to say that we are working for a world where people get equal access to opportunity, then we have to hustle to make that happen, right? In business, we put targets towards the things we want to achieve. We say we want to grow, so we find ways to grow. We say we want to cut, so we find ways to cut. If we say if we say we want to be diverse, if we say we want to channel talent bias, we will find ways to do it. And when it becomes core business, business finds a way to do it. So let me tell you a story. There's a father and his young son cruising along on a highway, and they're going really, really fast. It's a Mustang, it's beautiful, and traveling really fast, have a terrible car accident, right? The father dies on impact, and the boy is severely injured and is rushed to hospital. When they get to the hospital, the surgeon looks at the boy. I can't operate. Why? The boy is my son. How can that be? The surgeon is his mother. Now, hands up if the first thing you thought of was the surgeon was a mother. That, ladies and gentlemen, is bias. It's the way, and I tell this story all over the world, and the same thing happens. It's because, and it's not necessarily about saying that we are sort of consciously thinking of things in a discriminatory manner, but the way our brain has sort of been socialized. And the fascinating thing about that story was that it was told to a group of female surgeons, and they made the same mistake. Because we internalize it in the same way. It doesn't even matter. And I'll come back to sometimes about what our mindset is. It isn't necessarily kind of all about external. It's also about how we're thinking about the role. But the reality is that the biases, unconscious or implicit biases, are the shortcuts that our brains make, right? Because 11 million pieces of information. Our bodies receive 11 million pieces of information at any given moment. And we only have the bandwidth to process about 40. So what do? We make shortcuts. You learn that if something looks hot, you don't touch it. You learn that if somebody looks angry, you don't, mess with it, right? If there's a scorpion and it looks like it's gonna bite you or sting you, you don't touch it, right? These are all positive kind of shortcuts to be making because they help us. But what are the connections and the shortcuts that we're making that are limiting us? And that's the kind of broader question. And there's another piece. It's also about the language that we use that send these signals. It's the things like saying the engineering guys, right? How many times do we say, hey guys, or the engineering lads are coming, or righto fellas, even though there may be a few women in the room. We do it and then we're like, oh, sorry. But it's the fact that we make these shortcuts and it says, okay, you're welcome in this room, or you're not welcome, or you're inherently belonging, or you're not inherently belonging. It's also about the fact that you can Google something like top CEOs in the world, and they'll all kind of look the same. Awkward. I don't know, I get them all mixed up. Or the fact that in Australia, there are more CEOs named Peter than there are women CEOs. So I should just change my name to Peter, then I'm sweet, right? Peter Abdel-Magied, it'll go down well. Or the fact that, and I use this example in Australia, a young Indigenous girl can walk down a hall in Parliament and look at all the faces of the leaders in the country and never see one that looks like her. Now, what message is that implicitly saying to her? It's saying, this is not a place that you belong in. This is not a place where somebody like you can make it. Nobody will ever say it to you, but the environment speaks so much louder. I really like this one. There's something like 36% of men in America are over 64 and 62% of CEOs are over 64. Because somehow, and I know that, honestly, I know that some of the legitimacy that I get on a rig is because I'm tall. Because I'm tall and I can probably bench them, right? It's because we correlate competence and authority with height and stature. And that maybe harkens back to a sort of like implicit bias we have biologically around what's the sort of person that could protect us or whatever that looks like. But when it comes to things like professional services and so on, you don't need to be a big hulking person to be able to be really good at Excel, right? But somehow we correlate the sort of the physical attributes with leadership. And again, it's not something that you necessarily point out. But if, for example, there's a group of people walking towards you, and there is a big, tall man and a much smaller woman, much smaller, petite woman, who are you automatically going to defer to, regardless of what the situation is about? So I talked about biases, right? And I talked about the kind of cognitive biases that exist. There are over 150, and I wanted to talk about 4 in particular, right? The first is in-group bias. This idea of like, and it happens in all sorts of ways. But the funny thing is, it doesn't really require much. If I split you guys in half, I said, if I split you all half into this group, you all are blue, and I do it, right? And you all are red, for example, and I made you play a game against each other, all of a sudden, the red team will be like, even if you had a friend on that team, you'd be like, yeah, man, we're one team and we're better than you and we're going to have this battle, even though there's literally nothing apart from a random like selection of where you sat, right? It happens all the time. You walk into a room, they give you like a number, like all the ones in that corner, all the twos in that corner. And then all of a sudden you have some sort of affinity with the people in your number. It makes no sense. But it's because our brains are automatically, there's this, the reptilian part of our brain, the inside part, the sort of like oldest part of our brain, the amygdala, is responsible for this fight or flight mechanism. And that fight or flight mechanism is attuned to our old school kind of in-group, out-group mentality. Back in the day, we had to protect our village from, whatever sort of things would come and attack us, right? That sometimes bleeds into the rest of our lives. And even though we have something called the prefrontal cortex, which is the front thinking part of our brain, particularly in times of stress, we let that fight or flight in-group, out-group mechanism take over. And we go for the people that are like us, right? I mean, the cops and army and authority sort of groups, they have a really strong in-group, out-group fight. And they do that because that's how they protect each other. Like, if you're one of us, and we will protect each other. I think oil fields is a little bit like that. Service companies, I know when I was a field hand, I was like, man, fieldy, like the rest of y'all can whatever, even though there was no real basis for that, right? I mean, life. But you do that. We do that as a way of kind of defining our identity. The second is anchoring bias. And this is where you take the first piece of information you learn about something and it anchors you and you can't kind of move away from it. So the first time you interact with a particular type of person, right? Or the first time you go into a particular country and have a particular type of experience, and all of a sudden everything about that country is based around that experience. Even if the rest, like people say to me, well, I worked with a female engineer once, she was shit. Sorry. But people will say that and they will assume that the rest of them are. Even though the next 50 they've worked with are brilliant, it's that first piece of information that, I'm sorry for saying, it's that first piece of information that anchors them in a certain belief. The oil field, I'm telling you. My father, when I get this thing called rig mouth, where like the first few days after I get off the rig, it's just foul. And then I go home, this is completely off topic, I'll go home and my father will be like, you're not saying anything for a day. The third thing is called affinity bias, right? And this is the idea that we like to be with people like us, right? We like to be, like when I see a Muslim chick who's like got swag, I'm like, I want you in my face, right? And so like the example is, like you're in a selection panel for a job, and we'll take me for example. A young Muslim woman walks in, a little bit nervous, and I say to her, and she starts to answer the question, doesn't really do a very good job. I'm like, hey, doll, just calm down, it's all good. I'll give you another chance. He breathes in, feels more comfortable, and continues. Does a great job. Another guy walks in, call him Jack, and he also has a little bit of trouble at the beginning. But I don't feel the same connection with Jack, right? And I'm like, man, I don't give him, even though I might not even have noticed the fact that I gave the other person a bit of an opportunity because I felt that connection with her, I gave her a bit more leeway. I gave her a bit more space, right? And I didn't extend that same kind of thing with Jack. And so when somebody, and even though Jack and let's call her Layla, Jack and Layla answered the questions in the exact same way, and they gave the same responses, and they were equally as competent. When somebody asked me about the selection, about the panel later on, I'm like, oh man, Jack just didn't have, he wasn't as smooth, he didn't have the same vibe. I don't think he was as good. And it's because when we walk into a room and people are of a similar experience and people have some sort of connection, go for the same team, if you can walk into a room and you're like, oh, you're wearing that hat, I go for this, I don't know what, I'm trying here. And you can make that connection around something. Then all of a sudden you see them as somebody in your group. Let's link into that name group out. But if it's somebody who you don't necessarily have that shared connection with, it becomes a little bit more formal, which is fine. But it's those subtle things that change our decision. And the last, which I've talked about, is confirmation bias. We find information that backs up what we already believe in every situation. Whether it's, I think Adidas is the best shoe, and I will find information to back that. And any other information, I'll be like, oh, even though my Adidas shoes will fall apart constantly, I'll be like, oh, that time, it got flooded, or I will look at the information, that the data that comes in, and interpret it in ways that I already agree with. And it's so subtle, but it compounds, right? And so they did this study in an organization that has eight layers or 8 levels of hierarchy. You've got a 1% bias, so 49 to 51, male to female to male, sorry. That at every level, when you make promotions, it ends up being a huge difference. And that's how we get to where we are now across industry. There are very, very subtle biases, but they end up compounding, and then we get to a situation where all the top CEOs look the same. And I had to put this one in here because I hear this all the time, right? And I used to be someone who kind of said this as well. I was like, I don't want to be part of some target or quota. I don't want people to pick me just because I'm the Muslim brown woman engineer ticking all the boxes. I want to be hired on merit. There's this fascinating study that looks at organizations that say that merit is its founding hiring principle. They're like, we're an organization that hires on merit. And above, those organizations are hugely and significantly overrepresented in organizations that have more inequality in their hiring process. Or they end up hiring more men, and they hire the more sort of typical version of an employee. Because the thing is, right, somehow, somewhere, we believe that merit is, or men and malehood is associated with competence and capability. And I'll talk about this later, but it's this idea that a guy will walk into a room and be assumed and deemed competent unless proven otherwise, and a woman or a person of color or even a person with a disability is deemed incompetent unless proven otherwise. So you walk in on the back foot, you walk in having to prove yourself. Whereas if you're somebody who is part of the norm, you walk in with the groundwork already laid for you, and you have to royally screw up for people to be like, maybe not. Maybe you just had a bad day. Happens a lot. I mean, think about it, right? You guys have all been in situations where there's been somebody who's just not very good at what they do, but you've taken it as an individual situation. So like, that person, not very great. But usually, and it's a privilege that people who don't fit the norm don't care, right? Because that person then becomes a representation of all the people, right? Like, if you have one Sudanese person come and work for you, and that Sudanese person does a terrible job, you're like, oh my God, Sudanese people are terrible. Even though it's just a single individual, you don't get the opportunity and the privilege of being treated as an individual. And the other interesting thing about merit is that it's kind of, I remember having this conversation with a bloke at work. I have very funny conversations with the guys in the reef. They do not know what to make of. I like walk in and it'll be like, walk into lunch. I'm like, what do you guys think of feminism? They're like, Yasmin, come on. We just want to eat. I love it. But this one particular bloke, he said to me, he was like, Yasmin, you women, if somebody said to me, I'm going to give you a job because you're a bloke, I'd be like, yeah, sweet. I'd take it. It's like, I don't get why you guys are complaining. First, you're complaining that you don't get enough opportunities, and then when we want to give you the job, you don't want to take it because you don't want to get it because you're a woman. What's up with that? And I remember thinking, touche. Like, and actually, that was probably one of the conversations that changed my mind. I was like, I suppose if I was a bloke and someone was like, well, we got a spot for a bloke on this board, would you like it? I'd take it. But there's this complex that we sometimes have as women or as people of color of like somehow we have to somehow fight all of the systems and get there despite everything. And if somebody makes it a little bit easier for us, we don't want to take it just in case it jeopardizes our legitimacy, right? We want to be seen as legitimate. But I'll tell you what I've decided to do. Take the spot and then prove you're legitimate when you get there. Take the spot, prove you're legitimate, and then show so many other people how awesomely legitimate you are and how awesomely legitimate the rest of the other people that you want to bring on board are. And so then you get a critical mass, and you no longer simply represent the one token woman or black person or whatever. Then you all get to be individuals, right? We can't, I think part of me has gotten to the point where I'm like, the opportunities aren't going to come in ways that I may want them to. But in whatever way the opportunity will come, I will take it, I will make the most of it, and I will run and go from there, right? Because the world is changing in ways that are too fast for us to wait, right? Too much is happening in the world for us to wait and be like, I don't like how this opportunity is being presented to me. I'm going to wait a little longer until I feel comfortable. There is no time for us to feel comfortable anymore. Things are changing all around us at breakneck speed. Like every day, things are happening in the news, not only our industry, but in society, the way we're all interacting with each other. We need to be able to sort of say what needs to be done and how can we go out and do it. And maybe this is a reflection of my personality, the yellow and the red. But I think it's about time that we stop having the conversation and recognizing that there is action that needs to be taken. But back to the script. I find this one really interesting as well because it comes back to this idea of merit. In Australia, they sent out 4,000 resumes, right, with exactly the same resumes. And you would have heard this kind of study before because they do it with different, Jane and John and that kind of thing. In the Jane and John situation, exact same resume, Jane would be offered less, be deemed less competent, and less likely to be hired. Same culturally in Australia, we have the issue where depending on how ethnic your name sounds, you may or may not, like, if you have a Middle Eastern name, you have to send out 64% more resumes to get the same number of callbacks as a white name. If you have a Chinese name, which is so fascinating to me, because the Chinese in Australia are the model migrants. They never riot, they buy real estate and they pay their taxes and they create businesses. They're the model migrant, cause no trouble. And yet, 68% more resumes to get the same number of callbacks. If you're Italian, you're doing pretty good. People clearly love pizza. and you only have to send out 12% more, right? But it is fascinating because it's the exact same resume. So if merit, if this idea of merit was truly, truly true, this wouldn't happen. If the idea of merit truly existed, and this is a slightly controversial line of mine that I really like using. Somebody once said to me that we will know we've reached true equality when there are as many incompetent women in power as there are incompetent men. Also, but potentially true. Because if you think about it, and I'll just make this point, the women that do make it to the top, by and large, can be amazing at what they do because they've had to work so much harder for it. And this kind of wraps up. So there was this really fascinating study that was done on women in engineering, and it looked at the 4 different ways that gender was dealt with, right? And for people that have worked in the field or even in the office, right? These are you'll recognize this kind of happening in your life. So the first is that gender is amplified. It's this idea of I walk into a room and I'm like, somebody's like, guys, no more swearing. There's a lady present. I'm like, firstly, you do not know how foul my mouth is, right? Not that I would ever tell my mother, right? But secondly, what that does is it highlights my difference. It says, here is somebody, implicitly, here is somebody who doesn't belong to our group, and we have to change our behavior to allow them to fit in. Now, even if it's done in the best of intentions, and often it is, because often I've had old guys, be like, oh, if my mother had seen me talk like this in front of a lady, she'd have my neck. I'm like, mate, it's fine, right? I'm not your mother. But most of the time it's done with the best of intentions. They want to respect and have and kind of almost in their minds often, it's a way to make a safe space. But by highlighting it in a way, it depends on how it's done. But if it's done in a way that sort of says, here is somebody different, it just re-emphasizes the person's difference. The second is this idea of gendered expectations, right? So it's the fact that despite a woman's stature in a team, it's quite often the woman that's expected to do the minutes, to clean up after the meeting, to organize the birthday cake or the birthday card, even if, and this is the thing, most of the time I did this talk once and a lady got really upset. She was like, but I love doing the birthday cakes. I'm great at doing the birthday cakes. I'm like, I'm not taking away from your fantastic baking skills. But what it is, it's the expectation that despite whatever role that you play in the team, that you will do that as well as taking on the sort of female and gendered role expectation, right? And somebody once also said to me, was like, well, the guys are they'd never organize a birthday cake, or they would be terrible at making the cards. And that's probably true, but also, again, reinforcing. Or it's the fact that, as an engineer, one of the first questions I get asked is, am I married and do I have kids? Not where have I worked or what is my experience? Because people will see me first as a woman and then as an engineer. And my identity is not, in a professional sense, as important. The third is that the individual is tuned out. And I love this, right? Because I'll give this example, and the women will nod and the men will be like, that doesn't happen. So you're sitting at a table at work or in a meeting, and a lady will say an idea. And then a few minutes later, a guy will repeat the same thing, and everyone will be like, mate, Joe, what a great idea, right? Has anyone had that happen to them? Right. And it's as if we can't hear. And like it happens, and as I said, most of the guys will be like, well, I've never seen that happen. Never happened to me. You may have been the bloke that repeated the idea. But what it is, it's like somehow deep down inside, again, it comes down to being socialized to hear a certain voice, a voice of authority, and to pay attention to certain voices in the team. Whether rightly or wrongly, that's how sometimes we've been socialized. But being aware of it is incredibly important so that when it does happen, you can be like, hey, Mary's idea was awesome. Thank you for repeating it, Joe. And the fourth one is what I talked about earlier. It's this idea of doubting technical ability. It's the idea that I will have to walk in and prove my competence before people believe that I'm competent. Whereas if I was perhaps a little whiter and a little more male, a lot more male, then it would be different. And then, and this is what I come back to. This is my glamorous life as a fieldie. We are invisible as engineers. But then what happens is often what women tend to do is try to undo their gender and in doing engineering, they undo their gender. So they will take on male characteristics or they will try to essentially fit in. Often that's one of the coping mechanisms. Is you sort of, you rationalize, you say, well, it's all right, he's 75. In his generation, it was different, so I'll let that comment fly. Or, oh, it was only a joke, it doesn't really matter. And the difficult thing, to be perfectly honest, I will stand here and I will be very, very honest, is that you've got to pick your battles. And there are a lot of battles. And if you pick every single one, nobody's going to talk to you on the rig. Nobody. They're like, there's that chick. The moment you open your mouth, because don't say it's biased. So it's about finding that balance, right? And this is something that I'm still learning as a young engineer. I'm still learning as to how to apply the theory to the world that I live in, right? Easier said than done. So I've talked to you about a lot of dramas, a lot of doom and gloom, about how our brains are pretty much hijacking our ability to make good decisions. How do we challenge that? How do we mitigate that? How do we protect the downside? And so I'm going to give you a couple of different angles. One is the kind of individual level and one's kind of at the institution. The first I would recommend is to do something called the IAT, the Implicit Association Test. It's this amazing test that Harvard designed. Millions of people have done it. And essentially, it highlights to you where your bias is. And I did this test and I'm like, Yasmin, you're good, right? Surprisingly, even though I am an engineer and my father and mother are both technical people, and I've been deeply invested in kind of promoting different gender roles and so on for almost a decade, I completely associated the homemaker role with women and the working bread maker role with men, implicitly. And so having like that back in my face and kind of saying, well, okay, this is an association that you have subconsciously that you don't even know you have or that you're constantly fighting is really interesting. Because we don't like to think we're biased. We don't like to think that we're like, yeah, that applies to everyone else, but we are different. I'm not lying about it. The reality is that most of us are. It's that recognizing that. And this then comes to calling it out. And we talk about it in safety culture all the time. Stop the job, take 5, all these sorts of things. Because we've recognized when it comes to changing culture, everybody is involved. And when it comes to changing culture, you need to give people permission to say, hey, something went wrong. We need to change that. So I told this to the blokes at work, and they love calling me out. They're like, hey, Yasmin, check your bios. All the time. It's good. It keeps me on my toes. But it is about sort of saying these are things, and it's okay to call it out. And it's okay. And it's also about having a very open conversation. So one of the things when I'm talking to sort of HR people is saying, when you go into a selection panel, have a really open conversation about where your biases are. I would, the kind of conversation I would have if I was a selection panel, I'm saying I'm going to be more positively biased towards women. I'm probably going to be more lenient on people that have had a disadvantaged background because that's what I am all about. So if I'm somehow blinded by something because of that, pull me up on it. And if you're super open and honest and transparent about those sorts of things, then you can have a richer kind of discussion. Now, this one is really, really, really important. And there's a difference between mentoring and sponsoring, right? Mentoring, there's the kind of line at the moment that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. Mentoring is giving advice. Everybody loves giving women advice. I'll tell you what you need to do, darling. Sponsoring is where you back someone and you put yourself out for somebody else. So I have gotten to where I am because I was sponsored by a number of people and by people. And when I talk about how do we bring men into the conversation, it's often in this space of sponsorship, because I would not have gotten to the positions I've gotten in work because, I would have gone for a particular job and had a more senior male kind of be like, actually, yeah, Yasmin can do that. Or one of the more senior engineers at work be like, you know what, this is, maybe a step higher than what you usually would be able to do, but I'm going to bring you into this team, right? And it's about people going out of their way and bringing someone up that is different, right? And it is a bit tricky because sometimes, you want to sponsor someone who is in your image. You want to sponsor someone who, you could be friends with, you could have a drink with, as it were. But if we sponsor people that are different, if we go out of our way to say, I recognize that we don't have shared experiences, but I'm going to give you an opportunity. And it's all about, as well, the opportunity being something that could come back to you, right? Because that risk, right, when you sort of offer someone up and say, oh, you should work with this person because I think they're great, you're going to want that person to be great. Otherwise, it's going to reflect on you. So there is that bit of risk. And that's why often we like to be a bit more comfortable. But taking that risk and saying, I'm going to try something a bit different can be really. And this is one that I haven't talked about before, but it's about what our own mindset is. So we walk into situations expecting the other person to have ill intent. As a Muslim woman of color, right, I can walk into many situations and expect the other person isn't going to be my biggest fan. But that is really ill. Like it's not going to help me in any way. And it's also about, do we walk into situations expecting all the guys to see us as less competent? Yes, the stats are there. But do we walk into situations expecting that they're going to be discriminatory, or expecting that they're going to think we're incompetent, or expecting, do we walk into situations and see the female engineer, and as a female engineer think that she's less competent? We do. And so it's about saying to ourselves, how do we, as people who care about this sort of thing, walk into situations with a different mindset? So I like to walk onto the rig and be like, I'm going to be your friend, even though you hate me. And I've got this weird kind of complex where I'm like, the more you hate me, the more determined I am to be your friend, which makes the blokes at work hate me even more. That's the next one, be like, hey, Tractor, what's going on? And they're like, I'd like you to do something. No, doesn't work. There's a few people being like, I cannot believe she does that on the rig. But it's about how do we walk into different situations and what mindset do we take it, and making sure that we are not internalizing some of the same things that we think others believe. That we, as people of color, don't internalize, post-colonial issues and kind of assume, because it happens, right? I'll work in countries where I've, I was born in Sudan. When I go back to Sudan, often people will pay more respect to those who are white or from European backgrounds than to those of their own country. And it's like, why are you reinforcing something that you say that you fight against? And it's about challenging that mindset that we have. It's hard. It's hard because it comes back to how we think about the world and how we interact with the world and how we've been socialized and the kind of messages that we're taught about what is valued in this world. But if we walk in feeling like we are valued and that we want to value everyone around us equally, then we can do that. At the institutional level, it's fascinating because every institution is going to tell you they love diversity. There is no company that's like, we don't like diversity. We don't want diversity. They all, like, every company is like, diversity is important to us. We believe in the power of diversity. But saying you're committed to something and actually demonstrating commitment, very different thing. As anybody who's been on a feedback panel will tell you. But I'm so committed to my work. Yes, but you've delivered nothing. And so it's this concept, because this is, I guess, another thing that comes up all the time. And I think I talked about it a bit earlier. What do people think about targets and quotas? Makes people super uncomfortable. But when have we ever, as a business, been like, we want to grow, we believe in growth, but we're not going to put a target on our growth because that would be a little unkind. No. We put a target on what we want to achieve, right? And then we make that happen. So if it is about the core business in the way that we say it is, why not put a target to it? Be a little cheeky. And the second thing, there's this concept called nudging, which is about how you essentially tweak things in society to manipulate people to do what you want. Used in advertising a lot, but also used in things like public health and so on to make people choose the right thing. So for example, you can kind of design things out of a system. So diesel and petrol bowsers are different sizes so that people can't put diesel fuel in a petrol car. Yeah, you guys use gas, the word. Anyway, so but instead of saying to consumers, don't put diesel in your petrol car, they essentially designed out the problem. So in the same way, we can do this with our HR training system. There was one example where there was a policy in a company that every time there was a promotion, particularly for a senior position, they would require 3 candidates and 2 of them would have to, like you couldn't have 2 that share the same demographic. So you couldn't have more than 2 men or 2 people of color or 2 whatever. The idea being that it would force someone to look outside the usual pool. It's small things like that that kind of allow that access to opportunity, sort of tweak the system, just bits and pieces here and there to hopefully change the final outcome. And I really like this piece of research. It's really fascinating because it talks about, they looked at diverse teams and they said to them, how effective do you think you are? All right, and diverse not just in gender or race, but in qualification, in background, those sorts of things. And the teams that were diverse felt less effective. They felt less confident in their ability to perform, but their performance was actually higher. So here's the thing. If you're working with a bunch of diverse people, imagine, remember the last time you worked with a bunch of people that didn't share anything, you didn't share anything with. It was uncomfortable. It was awkward. You didn't understand each other very well. You had to communicate extra to make things happen, right? That tension is how you get better ideas, is how you get better solutions, but it feels awkward. And so the idea is being uncomfortable is okay. Now, the other sort of kicker, I guess, is that when you look at, there was another study that looked at diverse teams kind of across industry, they found that the net benefit was 0. Why? Because when diverse teams were managed very well, they performed incredibly highly. But when a diverse team was not managed well, it performed much poorer than just a homogenous team. So when we're talking about diverse teams, we also have to teach people how to manage diverse teams well, because it's more difficult, because you can't fall back on the same shared experiences, because you can't crack the same jokes and expect everyone will understand. So yes, it'll be uncomfortable, but you also have to make sure that it's managed in the best way possible. And I'll leave you with this. Making change in the world is hard, right? If it was easy, it'd be in a different place. But the reality of the matter is that each and every one of us has an incredible capacity to have impact on the world around us. Even if you change the life of one person, even if you have an impact on one person, you have managed to have an impact in the world. Even if you sponsor one person in your entire 35-year career, but that one person is given an opportunity they wouldn't have been given, feels more confident in a way they would never have felt confident. One of my favorite stories is I work with a lot of blokes that are from very different demographics to me. And there was this one bloke who wasn't the biggest fan of Yasmin. Wasn't a fan of women on rigs or women of color or engineers, just a whole bunch of different things, Muslims. And I saw him reading a magazine magazine on Ducati. I was like, yes, I love Ducati. Walked on over. I was like, hey Matt, how you going? Mm-hmm. I'm like, you reading about Ducatis? I love Ducatis. Let's have a chat about it. And his demeanor changed when we started having a chat. And over the next couple of weeks, we talked about motorbikes, right? It's all we talked about. And I didn't really think much of it. A couple of months later, I got a message from one of my friends from high school. He was like, oh, do you know Matt? I'm like, yes, but how do you know him? You're a nerd. He was like, well, I'm friends with his sister. And she came into work today going on about how her brother had met some Muslim chick on a rig. And he went from being this racist redneck to someone who defends Muslim people all the time. And I don't know what she did to him. Right. And I love that story. I love that story, one, because it shows the power of human connection. And two, because it talks about the ability to have an impact on the world beyond what we expect. And each and every one of you, I want you, I really, if there's anything that you walk away with, I want you to understand and believe the incredible opportunity you have. Because you don't need to change the world, but you can change the world around you. And that, thank you very much.
So, wow. I think there's 1,000 people who are online joining this conversation, and I think you hear all of us to say, please don't ever change, because we really enjoy you just the way you are and the incredible message that you're bringing. And we thank you for your courage and your energy and your passion for the industry. We are your peers in the industry, and it's been just a pleasure to have you. For the folks online and in here in the room, unfortunately, we don't have time for questions because we wanted to give you so much time to share her message. But I just want to thank Halliburton and Wise for bringing this to our community, bringing it to the industry and across the world. And thank you to our partners at Shell and King Petro and also KPMG who are part of this partnership. So if you would join me in thanking Yasmin again, and we look forward to having more events and sharing those globally as well. Thank you.